Welcome to the Managing Soils for Water session. My name is Rex Dufour. I'll be moderating today's session, and I manage NCAT's California office in Davis. I'll be setting the stage with a few slides prior to our main speakers, Dr. Mike Morris and Dr. John Dickey. Please, if you have any questions, please type them in the Zoom chat, and we'll have, I hope, about 10 minutes at the end of the session to cover them. If we don't get to your question, we'll respond to it after this session via email. And before I start on my short presentation, I'd like to introduce Dr. Morris and Dr. Dickey. I've known Mike Morris for, I think, about 2 decades now. Mike has been promoting sustainable agriculture, water, food, and energy alternatives since joining NCAT in 1999. He currently leads the Soil for Water project, a multi-state peer-to-peer network of farmers, ranchers, and land managers who are discovering ways to catch and hold more water in their soils. Pretty important. Mike's other recent projects include the Subtropical Soil Health Initiative, Is Organic Farming Risky? Another project. Texas Organic Initiative, the Irrigator's Pocket Guide, which is an excellent resource, and energy training for agricultural professionals. Mike's based in Durango, Colorado. He previously led NCAT projects in Texas, North Carolina, California, and Montana. And Mike holds a PhD in philosophy and has taught courses on ethics, technology, and environment at colleges and universities around the country. And following Mike's presentation, Dr. John Dickey, he provides soils, agronomic and regulatory support to agricultural and non-agricultural land and water managers in California and elsewhere. He has worked for 40 years, mainly in the Western US, the Midwest, and West Africa. His projects currently focus on identifying farming practices that help to protect water quality and stabilization of large land surfaces to control dust emissions without too much water. And that's really important out here in California. He is technical program manager for the Southern San Joaquin Valley Management Practices Evaluation Program, known as MPEP, and coordinates the program's collaborative activities with partners such as NRCS, University of California, and California Department of Food and Agriculture, and numerous ag commodity groups. The MPEP is a grower-led, grower-owned program currently focused on maximizing retention and use of applied N by crops in the Central Valley, a very important initiative. So I'm going to just have a few slides here just to set the context and set the stage. There we go. As a lot of previous speakers have noted, many of the soils we work with in North America and elsewhere are, we're working with a degraded resource, mostly from lack of organic matter. That lack of organic matter results in compaction, poor soil function, and in some locations, salinity problems, which is an issue here in California. We've been mining soil organic matter for decades and over a century or more in some places. We've been able to mask poor soil function with the use of chemical fertilizers and pesticides, but this approach does not support a healthy soil ecology because it doesn't support adding organic matter and protecting the soil. And during floods or drought or extreme heat, plants suffer from poor soil function. Well-managed soils store and cycle both nutrients and water more effectively and help protect water quality above and below ground. So the fact of the matter is, our soils are simply not ready for the stresses brought about by climate change, which will entail more extreme heat, more extreme drought, more extreme flood events, and even more extreme cold events. So how is managing soil for water, or managing soil as an ecological system, different from conventional management? Well, it's an investment, just like farmers investing in new equipment or maintaining barns or investing in worker training. It attempts to relink the carbon and the nitrogen cycles in management of agricultural soils, which were severed by the Haber-Bosch process. And Haber-Bosch are some German scientists that about a century or more ago developed an artificial nitrogen fixation process and then scaled it up. And prior to that time, anytime you added nitrogen to the soil, you had to add some carbon because there were manures, cover crops, and other sources. This process allowed farmers to add just nitrogen to the soil without accompanying carbon. This approach is more dependent on healthy soil microbiology, which in turn, it makes management a little bit less precise due to the number of variables that impact the soil microbiology, including soil temperature, moisture, tillage, the amount of organic matter in the soil, and the carbon nitrogen ratios of various inputs, including cover crops. It's generally results in a slower release of nitrogen. The soil quality builds and provides returns over time, though. And managing for soil health benefits not only farmers, but everyone else. So it's in the public interest. Healthy soil support better water quality and quantity and provides healthier food. So Dr. Morris and Dr. Dickey will be discussing considerations and various approaches of managing soil for water. And with that, I'd like to turn the discussion over to Dr. Mike Morris.
Well, thank you, Rex. See if I can get my screen to share. Great to be with you all and have a chance to tell you about our Soil for Water project. Really, the purpose of my talk is going to be to ask you all to join me and get involved in this project. But before I do that, I want to start with a story. So the story of our project begins during the Texas drought of 2010 to 2015, which, as many of you recall, was quite devastating to farms, ranches, and businesses across Texas. I had just moved to Texas at that time, and I remember how hot and miserable it was. In Austin, there were 90 triple-digit days in the year 2011. Rivers and reservoirs dried up, and in the year 2012, the state of Texas issued a water plan, state water plan, concluding that we were in trouble and that we needed to find 8 million new acre feet of water to meet the expected demand by the year 2060. That report talked about dams, pipelines carrying water hundreds of miles across the state, groundwater and seawater desalination, seeding clouds to increase rainfall, and just about anything else you could think of, but it hardly mentioned soil at all. And this idea of improving soil health to catch more rainwater in soil was really barely mentioned in that report, if at all. Several of us got together, we held a meeting at that time, and we started this project basically because we thought this idea was promising. This idea of catching more water in soil was being overlooked, certainly in our state water plan, and it deserved more attention. So the goal of our project since the very beginning has been very simply to catch and hold more water in soil wherever and however we can. Like many of you, we also heard quite a few amazing success stories. We could start with North Dakota farmer Gabe Brown, who over a period from 1993 to 2011 increased his average organic matter levels from 2% to 5% and reached up to 11% in some of his fields. His infiltration rates increased from about a ½ inch per hour to about 8 inches per hour. And he also eliminated all use of synthetic fertilizers. And we've heard some other great stories this morning that are along the same lines. Another one from Texas was in 1969, J. David Bamberger bought the worst piece of ranch land he could find in the Texas Hill Country, and he made a variety of land management changes, including revegetating large areas with native grasses, and long dried up springs, seeps, and creeks began flowing again. And then, of course, from Alan Savory and many of the organizations that he founded, certainly including Holistic Management International, we heard many stories of from around the world of deserts returning to grassland, springs flowing again, and of course we also learned that much of Savory's work has been quite controversial. One of the surprising things in all these stories is how quickly these improvements have been happening. So ever since the Dust Bowl, we've been taught to think that soil is this fragile thing and you can easily lose it and it'll take centuries to rebuild it. And that's all true, but what we've had in these stories is people who are building topsoil and organic matter in a decade or two, and sometimes even less. Okay, let's just review a few basics. And first point is really almost by definition, healthy soils catch and hold water. If we look at the NRCS definition of healthy soil, it says it's soil that carries out 5 main functions. And one of these is regulating water flow and cycling. The others are listed there: sustaining diverse plant and animal communities, filtering and buffering potential toxics, cycling nutrients, and providing physical stability. But I would just note that in the first one, regulating water flow and cycling incorporates 2 different things. One is infiltration, which is that vertical movement of water down through the soil profile, and retention, which is the holding of water. Basically, as I think you all know, how does soil hold water? It has mainly to do with it having pores, just like a sponge, and they have to be pores of the right size. If they're too big, the water will continue to drain. So healthy soil has a lot of pores in it, and that has a lot to do with the fact that it's alive. So it's full of organisms that dig tunnels, they secrete substances that glue little teeny soil particles together in aggregates, and so on and so forth. The science around this is evolving. We're all learning about it at this conference, but I do want you to remember, keep in mind that there's 2 different things going on here. One is infiltration or intake of water, and the second is retention or water holding. And they're obviously different. You know, the sand on a beach is great at infiltration. It's pretty terrible at holding water. I would also note there's not really very standard vocabulary if we're talking about soil and water. So what some call available water capacity, others call plant available water, others call just simply available water. And then of course, improving soil health is by no means the only way to store water in soil. We can do it with physical changes, things like berms and swales, contour plowing, subsoil ripping, and even unusual things like increasing or introducing beavers into a landscape. We've already heard about the 5 principles of soil health this morning. I won't rehash those, but keeping the soil covered, minimizing disturbance, increasing biodiversity, keeping those live plant roots in the ground, and integrating livestock. Okay, how much water can a healthy soil hold? Well, a lot. And of course, it depends. It depends on the soil type, the soil depth, the slope of the land, the climate, and really a gazillion other factors. Many soils can hold 400,000 to 700,000 gallons per acre in each foot of depth. So a field with deep, healthy soil could easily hold over 1 million gallons of water per. Incidentally, there's way more fresh water in the Earth's soil than there is in all of its rivers, wetlands, and lakes combined. So how we manage the water in our soil is obviously incredibly important. I do want to talk about this infographic from NRCS, which probably many of you have seen because it's been reprinted, it's been restated, it's been sort of mangled and misquoted in lots and lots of places. It has been a great awareness tool, and what it says is that every 1% increase in organic matter results in as much as 25,000 gallons of available water, an increase of up to 25,000 gallons of available soil water per acre. Now this is true, the math behind it is solid, but I do want to point out a few things. First is to make sure you understand that increasing 1% means going like from 1% organic matter to 2% or 2% to 3%. It is not just going from 1% to 1.01%. And as most of you know, increasing organic matter by a full percentage point is really not necessarily that easy. Second, when you put organic matter into soil, it doesn't necessarily stay there. It tends to be lost through oxidation, erosion, or other processes. So it does need to be steadily replaced, and making a lasting improvement in soil health in soil organic matter is harder than just making a temporary improvement. And then third, notice those small words, as much as. So in reality, it depends. And you might see far less than 25,000 gallons added. And there are certainly situations where you could see far more than 25,000 gallons increased. However you cut it, it's a lot of water. 25,000 gallons is a little less than an acre inch, or the amount of water it would take to cover an acre of land 1 inch deep. But in a way, this infographic, although it's impressive and it's widely quoted, really understates the potential here. Just keep in mind that some fields out there are storing more than 1 million gallons of water per acre. And then finally, note that this only talks about adding organic matter, and that's not the only way to improve soil health. And there are lots of ways, and we'll talk about a couple of those. Okay, as Rex noted, one thing for sure is there's a lot of unhealthy soil out there, and you could look at that and you could be disappointed, or you could look at it as we do and see that as a conservation opportunity. And so on this map, it shows non-federal rangeland where 3 indicators of rangeland health are at least moderately below what NRCS considers to be reference conditions, meaning normal, you might think normal, healthy conditions. So dark colors are bad and lighter colors are good. And you can see just at a glance that there are major water conservation opportunities here. If you just pause and think for a minute about the water we could save in the western half of the United States by turning some of those orange areas into yellow, or yellow areas into green. And there are lots of ways of doing this. I've listed several of them on this slide. Adaptive multi-paddock grazing, which again goes by many different names, is one we work on a lot in our project. Reducing tillage, cover crops, integrating animals, compost, crop rotations, perennial crops, and converting cropland to pasture, micronutrients, microbial inoculants, and many, many other things. So our mission is to catch and hold more water and soil. Our vision is a critical mass of landowners who are using regenerative practices that improve soil health and the water cycle. And we think the best and really the only realistic way of achieving our goal is to work with farmers and ranchers. And after all, they control the vast majority of soils that could be improved. We're looking for ideas that will catch on and could be widely adopted. And our basic approach is what you might call citizen science. So we seek out and support landowners who want to try new ways of bringing depleted soils back to life. We help people with grazing planning. We help them monitor changes and improvements over time in their soils, vegetation, other living things and processes. We offer a lot of hands-on workshops and field days, and we're building this network of landowners who are interested in learning from each other. So the map shows you approximate locations of our currently active partner ranches, and they are all livestock operations at this point. All are doing some type of experiment to improve their soil health. I want to note that most of them are drawing their water from the Edwards Aquifer, which is a major source of drinking water for the big cities of San Antonio and Austin. And then one of them is up in the Ogallala Aquifer. So obviously there is intense interest in agricultural withdrawals from these aquifers. And here I also want to thank our funders, particularly the Dixon Water Foundation and the Meadows Foundation, 2 private foundations in Texas that helped us get started about 5 years ago. And we are currently also funded by the NRCS, and we have just been funded by Southern SARE. Okay, a quick statement of, I guess, kind of a manifesto, the things we believe that really guide our program. First is simply the idea that saving water and soil is a powerful, low-cost, uncontroversial, and underused method of water conservation. When I say it's uncontroversial, what I mainly have in mind here is that catching more water and soil is something landowners can do by themselves in a purely voluntary way, and it raises very few water rights complications. Second, the idea of saving water and soil is also a powerful motivator and reason to care about soil health. We've met very few landowners in my entire life that don't want more water. Third, we believe that farmers learn best from other farmers in a peer-to-peer learning mode. Fourth, we believe in stories. Stories change behavior as much as or more than science. And then fifth, we believe that landowners will discover soil health innovations through experimentation. That last point is meant to connect with the theme of this conference, which after all is a soil health innovation conference. So we don't think these are necessarily going to be, inventions, high-tech, scientifically complex ideas, and they're not necessarily going to come from scientific experts. Ideas catch on in farming and ranching for a variety of reasons. Some of these have to do with technology and science, but others really do not. And so we're interested in behavior change, and we know that's going to have to come from producers themselves. Just want to introduce you to a few of our participants. Our approach is working well. Our project is growing quickly. Again, all of these folks are livestock producers, and they're doing very different things on their land to improve soil health. They do meet regularly. They enjoy talking to each other. And I should note that we encourage them to do these experiments on a fairly small scale, maybe just a small pasture or a corner of their property. A lot of these experiments we assume are going to fail. And so we want our participants to have the lowest possible financial risk. And just to mention a few things they're doing, pasture cropping, multi-species grazing, subsoil ripping, using hogs to remediate damaged land, mob grazing, which again goes by many different names: management intensive, rotational, adaptive multi-paddock, savory grazing. You've heard it called many different things. Short duration grazing in riparian areas, brush clearing, soil amending with wood chips, planting native seeds, and many, many other things. Some of our participants have already had very good results. Travis and Mandy Krause, who are in the top center at Parker Creek Ranch, have raised their organic matter levels in one of their pastures from 2 to 5% over about a 7-year period. We also do a lot of workshops and field days. We keep things fun. These have been attended by many hundreds of people, and they're social events as much as they are educational events. In the top center, you can see a picture of the New Zealand ecologist, soil ecologist, Nicole Masters, who came out and did a 2-day workshop for us about a year ago. We're also making videos, recording podcasts, and so on. And in the bottom center is my colleague, Kara Kroger. I think some of you met her this morning during Fred Provenza's talk. Kara has done a great job building out this network. I do want to say a couple words about how we measure success, or how anyone measures success if they're trying to improve soil health or capture more water in their land. There are many, many tools you can use. I'm not going to belabor them or go into great detail right now. We've tried many of them in our project, and we're always interested in trying new ones. On the 15 active farms and ranches in our project in Texas, we've been setting up transects, like you see kind of in the top center, a straight line that we record carefully. We go back to years, 1 year after the next, make consistent measurements. We do soil testing. We're big believers in soil testing. We do that at all of our participating ranches. We love soil moisture data loggers, and you can see those in the picture on the left and a different one in the top right. Some of our participants are trying those. In the project, we take a very flexible approach. We give people a wide range of choices about how to measure their own success. And so what we found is oftentimes very low-tech tools like a push rod, an infiltration ring, or just even taking occasional set point photos is really all people really want or need. And I will just editorialize a moment here and say that we've come to realize that many of our landowners really don't like being committed to a long-term plan of careful, rigorous scientific monitoring, and they just aren't going to do it. So we have come to sort of accept that. And again, we're flexible and working with people to monitor in a way that they find will be helpful to them. There's a saying that you probably all heard: you can't manage what you can't measure. And in our project, we respectfully disagree. We think farmers manage things all the time without really measuring them. They measure them with their eyeballs. They don't necessarily use a sophisticated tool. And they're really looking for changes they can see with their own eyes, things that really prove to them that something worked. I'm basically going to stop here, except to give you a couple updates and tell you how you can get involved in our project. And I really want to encourage all of you to consider getting involved. If you want to get on our mailing list, please just go to soilforwater.org. If you don't remember anything else from my talk, please remember our easy to remember URL, soilforwater.org. Sign up for our mailing list. In October, we were funded by the NRCS to expand. And so we are already expanding from Texas, where we started, into 3 new states. They're in the green on the map: New Mexico, Colorado, and California. And if you are a livestock producer in any of those 3 states, or you know any, please go ahead, and we welcome you to join our Soil for Water landowner network. And again, just go to soilforwater.org, fill out a brief application form, and you're in. What you get as a member is free technical help. You get discounts on soil testing, discounts on pasture map software, access to our listserv discussion group, and a variety of other nice perks. We will soon be accepting applicants from other states, but for now it's just those 4. Second, just last week, we learned that we've been funded by Southern SARE to expand into the states of Arkansas, Mississippi, and Virginia. We will be accepting network members from those states very soon. Third, I just want to say we're highly collaborative. We work already with dozens of groups. We acknowledge freely that virtually nothing we're doing is really that unique. And we partner with many other excellent groups that share our vision and our goals. And then finally, we are in the process of collecting stories and creating what we're, for now, calling an Atlas of Regenerative Farms and Ranches. And this will be a collection of stories from around the country, success stories of people who are having success improving their soils and catching water in their soils. And we will be collecting stories for this. And we would invite all of you to consider stories from your own farm, your own ranch, your own community, or your part of the country. We're constantly trying to learn about innovation that's happening on farms and ranches, and we really want to share those discoveries and achievements with others who can benefit from them. And so with that, I will turn it back over to you, Rex, or over to John.
Thank you, Mike. Just a quick clarification question. Will crop producers be eligible to join your project?
They will soon. We're not quite ready for them yet, Rex, but probably within a year. And we absolutely plan to expand and have all agricultural producers involved.
Great, thank you. All right, John, I think you're up.
Sounds good. There we go. All right, I'll be talking about kind of the irrigated systems, following on from Mike's great presentation about dryland systems, focusing on that. And some of the great organizations we work with, as Rex mentioned, the organization I work with is the Southern San Joaquin Valley Management Practices Evaluation Committee. It's really a water quality organization, grower organization. And our partners include the state, California Department of Food and Agriculture, and NRCS, as well as a lot of great cooperators at University of California, and of course, many, many growers. So the focus here will be on California's Central Valley, where precipitation varies from about 7 to over 38 inches per year, north to south. So the south down around here, that low end, and that high end's up in the north end of the Sacramento Valley, and the two big parts are Sacramento and San Joaquin Valleys. That's kind of the setting I'll focus on. It doesn't represent all of irrigated agriculture, but it's a part I know, and I think there are some things happening here that are interesting and perhaps relevant in other locales. So my work is principally around water quality, and especially about groundwater pollution by nitrate from fertilizers. Some of the areas in the valley you'll see exceed the drinking water standard of 10 milligrams per liter. Some of the worst areas are kind of in the central and southeastern portions. The principal sources have been identified as animal waste and other fertilizers. I'm not really going to focus on that, but that's part of my perspective, and it may color what I say. Soil health. I'll just talk a little bit about soil health and irrigated crops. That's the focus of this session, or this presentation, and how it might differ from dryland situations. In some ways, irrigated systems are less sensitive to soil health than dryland systems. And why would that be? Of course, irrigation supplements precipitation, but the soil is still where the plant roots find water. And so that means that soil health is relevant, despite the fact that we have, somewhat more control, we think, over soil hydrology. Is it a bigger deal? Soil health a bigger deal in organic systems, because in conventional systems you can supplement nutrients with mineral fertilizers, maybe. But regardless of the system, better soil health can boost productivity, help to conserve water, and facilitate management. And so most of the land that I'm referencing is really kind of spans conventional and organic systems. So that's not a major differentiating factor in the stuff I'm going to be talking about. So we'll talk a little bit about the setting. There's been a huge shift to perennial crops and micro irrigation in the Central Valley. Those of you who are real familiar with these systems, it may be redundant for you, but for those of you who are not up to date on what's been happening out here too much, this will be helpful. So we're really talking about this suite of crops: almonds, walnuts, pistachio, grape, and citrus predominantly. And that acreage has expanded to over 60% of the land in the Central Valley. So it's been a big shift. It's capital intensive, very productive, with greater gross revenue per acre in general than the annual crops that were grown on those lands previously. Fields can't be fallowed during drought because they have to be irrigated every year. So that intensifies drought's effects regionally. With strong prices, recent drought, and better and cost-effective irrigation technology has been a massive expansion of micro irrigation in many crops. So that facilitated shift to predominantly fertigation to supply nutrients to plants, higher yields, and yield per unit water, so water use efficiency, which kind of means that more resources have to be routed through soils to crops. So we don't think about that. We have a more productive system. It actually places greater demands. So these soils need to perform better than they did before in terms of supplying our crops with resources. The micro-irrigated systems have proven to be more tolerant of saline water and saline soil, as well as of inferior drainage conditions, which means that a lot of these crops have expanded onto less ideal soils and onto newly irrigated lands, amazingly. So here's just kind of an example. This is of an annual crop. This is an extreme cotton, and the cotton acreage, which was primarily, it's all cotton here, as the line was way up at 1.6 million acres at one time, now down at about a tenth of that. So this is the extreme of annual crop decline, but in general, there has been a general decline across crops. Now here are almonds. Try to scale it to about the same level so you can kind of see where it's going. And in 2020, almonds are way up here. They're almost where almonds where cotton was. So almonds are just one example. They're the most widely planted perennial, but there have been similar trends in other perennial crops. At the same time, yields have increased over time. Okay, and some of this increase, now looking at tomatoes, processing tomatoes, has coincided with an increase in the micro-irrigated lands. And we found that micro-irrigation just is one of those secrets for getting water and fertility to our crops really efficiently. So we've found that their yield potentials are in excess of what we might have imagined. And so that trend in micro-irrigation is really across all crops. So this is the micro drip kind of coming up here. And this is not totally up-to-date graph. If it were up to date, it would show that the majority of our land is now micro-irrigated. So either drip or micro spray. And so it's annual crops, but really predominantly perennial crops. So more about the setting. Sorry for all the background, it'll make everything make more sense. New water supply and water quality regulations in California with a further tightening of the water supply due to a 5-year drought that began in 2011. More wells were drilled during that period than previously existed in the Central Valley. It exacerbated aquifer depletion, loss of shallow wells and subsidence, big problems, and was the impetus for a sea change in regulation of groundwater, which was really not intensively regulated in California. Strangely, we seem to regulate everything else ahead of everybody, but places like Colorado were way ahead of us in this regard. And the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, or SGMA, was passed during the heat of the drought. There's also occasioned by the tight water supply and SGMA, the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, we have had an increase in managed aquifer recharge. And so to increase the sustainable water yield. And so that's basically we're routing floodwater through irrigation systems, which requires high soil intake rates. So something you get from a healthy soil and don't get from an unhealthy soil. Is a whole new kind of function really of our ag lands. And it's crucial to the future of farming because those we're going to have restricted water supplies that have to be mitigated. The impairment of groundwater quality by leaching nitrate, I mentioned right at the beginning. We've had shallow domestic wells serving disadvantaged communities that have really been impacted by this. And that was the impetus for new water quality permits issued to groups of irrigators throughout the Central Valley. That's called the Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program. So that organization I told you I work for was just created in response to this program, and that's why it's so focused on water quality. So all these things affect the way people are looking at healthy soils. Agricultural contributions to air pollution are another big issue, particularly burning of crop residues, and especially in the San Joaquin Valley, so the southern portion of this region we're talking about, and dust from operations like harvesting of nuts and from barren orchard floors. That's how walnuts and almonds are picked up. So those have all put pressure on growers. So we're going to talk a little bit about that air pollution here as a driver. About 2/3 of California emissions from ag burning are from the Central Valley. Burning is one among many fine particle sources, including wildfires. So you can see here in the San Joaquin Valley, or down the San Joaquin Valley, about 5%. So it's not causing all the problems, but it's significant. And so has arisen an alternatives to open burning incentive pilot program in the San Joaquin Valley that provides subsidies to growers to be able to implement whole orchard recycling or other more soil health friendly management of crop residues and orchards. You see that there's good progress. This is tons of particulate matter produced partly by ag burning. The orchard removal is the gold stuff here. And so there's a real reduction, and vineyards are the green. So there's a reduction overall pretty swiftly up to about the time the drought began. And then things rebounded. And why? Well, with the onset of the drought, a lot of those perennial fields had to be pulled out. Remember, they have to be irrigated every year. If you don't have water, then that's an option. So a lot of it were pulled out. Also, we lost a lot of the biomass facilities that use those residues in a more sustainable way. So now you kind of have to get the genie back in the bottle. And so I've got an example here of another part of California. This is more historical. This is back in the 90s. And we're looking really at about 500,000 acres of rice that really shifted from crop residue burning to recycling them in the soil in response to the same sorts of air quality problems. And they, into the bargain, they created a whole bunch of winter flooded waterfowl and shorebird habitat that's just been profoundly beneficial to the Pacific Flyway. PM particulate matter emissions dropped by 84% in 13 years and later reached 90%. So that's this trend right here. This is the shift from burning as it declined to incorporating crop residues. So that's kind of where the San Joaquin Valley needs to go. And so exactly how that'll happen, nobody knows, but that's people are working on it really hard. So what happens when you recycle orchards, right? If this is an alternative that needs to be looked at for air quality reasons, what happens to our farming? And so the title here kind of explains what happens. It helps mitigate climate change, but what else happens? And some of the information in this paper is really helpful. Our microaggregates increased in the ground systems quite significantly, about doubled. Meaning you've got better soil structure, and the mass or the mean weight diameter of aggregates increase. So this is another metric of better soil aggregation, and as a result, we've got the soil moisture characteristic curve. You see a whole bunch more water stored, and about 10% by volume more stored at low tensions, which is very helpful when you're trying to manage water and nutrients. And hydraulic conductivity is improved. So that's something we need for all the things we talked about, including managed aquifer recharge, but certainly just to grow our crops. Whole suite of all the red circled parameters: bulk density, compaction, cation exchange, total nitrogen, soil organic carbon, and permanganate oxidizable carbon, which is highly correlated with storage of carbon in soils, all increased. So this is a pretty powerful technology being pretty widely adopted. And a little more, it also helps you grow your crop, have higher yields in the ground systems, and significantly it's a more stable yield. So if you notice here, kind of reading this graph a little more carefully, this is regular irrigation, deficit irrigation. The yield in the deficit irrigated system is higher than when ground, right? When the trees are ground, is higher than the yield in the burn system with regular irrigation. So you're more robust to drought is a good way to put it, but also more flexible for irrigation systems. And the water use efficiency improved, which is something we need with Sigma coming down the road. All right. So let's talk about kind of other kind of the things we think about all the time as far as soil health practices, practices that promote soil health. And Russ Lester's presentation from the morning session was just excellent. A very concrete, on the ground sort of depiction of this. This is more general, but talks about some of the things that Russ did. So what do we need soil? What do amendments and cover crops help us with? Help us get precipitation into the ground, help us get irrigation in the ground, whether it's for crop consumptive requirements or to reclaim our soils, keep salt at bay, especially in the southern part of the valley where that's a major need and could be difficult to get enough water in to do that. And then aquifer recharge to augment sustainable yield. And this is really massive amounts of water that you want to move through your soils if you can. help us reduce runoff, which is another regulated item under the Irrigated Lands Program. Get greater water use efficiency, helps with sigma, and greater uniformity. And one of our greatest enemies when it comes to productivity or recovery of nitrogen so that it doesn't leach is lack of uniformity. And while we might think we have very perfect cropping systems here, what you see when you look carefully at actual evapotranspiration is many of our fields are highly variable, but our most productive fields are by far the least variable. And so they've achieved great uniformity, and cover crops in particular are very helpful with that. On a fertility side, it helps us with there's more, less leachable pools of nitrogen, enhanced soil life, more carbon stored in the soil, smaller carbon footprint, etc. How do these practices conflict with our cropping systems? And so what are the things to work out? And again, I'd mentioned that Russ's talk was great, and that you saw how one grower has really resolved these. I'd mentioned that Russ is kind of in the middle of the valley. Some of the areas to the south have less rainfall, and their solutions are going to have to be slightly different. So almonds and walnuts are mostly shaken on the bare orchard floors where they dry before being picked up. That generates PM10, which is another pollutant, but it also can compromise, along with the incorporation of organic amendments, those orchard floor conditions you need to get all the nuts off the ground. Catch frames are an alternative that's being explored and expanded, as basically not dropping the nuts onto the ground anymore. These are used in pistachios and other crops, so that could help out quite a bit. Frost protection and water supply. Cover crops can intercept sunlight to otherwise warm orchard floors. As you saw, Russ used overhead sprinklers, and so he had another frost control. Micro sprinklers in general are used for frost control, so that can mitigate that problem to some extent. Cover crops use water that crops may need, so you've got to work out that balance. Rain-fed establishment of carefully chosen seed mixes like the one Russ used, along with timely mowing or killing are really the ways to kind of get around that. But each grower has to kind of work it out for themselves. As far as fertility programs, the uncertain rate and timing of N availability from organic sources to crops is obviously a little different from what we see more in these micro irrigated systems is spoon feeding, which is tiny doses of nitrogen many times during the season to match the uptake patterns of the crops. And so really integrating that with organic matter and cover crop sources of nutrients is kind of still a work in progress. So just in summary, the soil health innovation drivers in the Central Valley, drought and sigma, have really led to the need to find efficient ways to use available water, recharge floodwaters to replenish aquifers. The Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program has driven us to minimize the N subject to leaching, to retain N in the root zone, and to really take advantage of N cycling through organic pools. Regulatory limits on particulate emissions have really driven us to on-site recycling of crop residues rather than burning. Elevated crop production goals that have come through, the fortuitous, combination of all these factors that have given us, exceptionally high yields at this point. We need to provide those vigorous crops timely availability of all the resources they need in the root zone, and only a healthy soil can really do that. And then climate change, we see interest from purchasers of these commodities in certification of sustainable production systems, and there are other incentives out there also, as you know. So as with all cultural practices, measures to improve soil health need to fit into the overall farming operation, and that's an operation by operation, field by field exercise. Adoption increases as growers resolve these conflicts through their own creativity and discover the benefits that are on the other side. Soil health innovations that complement and enhance production systems like the ones we have exist and have demonstrated benefits. The need and potential for more of these seems strong. Just want to acknowledge our member coalitions, 7 of them in the Southern San Joaquin Valley. And this is our website if you're more interested in our program. And these are many of our supporters throughout industry and academia and public institutions. So I thank you for making time, and Rex, back to you.
Thanks very much, John. That was a really informative presentation, as well as Mike too. We do have time for questions, and I'm going to paraphrase some of these questions. One of them is, there's a question about what caused the kind of biomass industry reductions of capacity.
Yeah, good question. And the honest answer is I don't know. I know that it was a factor, and I didn't take time to look into it, so I apologize not to be able to respond better to that question. And Rex, I'll check it out and get you a better answer than that, so you can share it with the questioner.
Okay, well, and I would note that there's a good article in California Ag, which is a monthly magazine that UC puts out. It was about 1.5 years ago, and they talked about the reduction of the biomass used to be burned, and I think I'm guessing here that it was air quality concerns that really closed down those plants, and that kind of reduced that avenue for farmers to sell, chippings and things like that.
Well, which is pretty ironic, right? Because the air quality concerns of not sending residues there are pretty substantial as well.
Right. There's another question here, and I'm going to paraphrase this one. So can you talk a little bit more about, the regenerative agriculture approach or concept of, changing flood liabilities into something that can mitigate, the things that will be brought on by climate change, drought, saltwater intrusion, groundwater declines, things like that. And I would open that up to Mike as well after your response, John.
Right. I mean, that's a big question, but I'm just going to briefly say that the impact on flood risk may not be as great as we'd like, but the nature of flood risk is that you basically you have to do a whole lot of things to mitigate it, and so there's only so much floodwater that can be routed through our distribution and application systems. And so it's kind of that there's a restrictive element there. So it's not like we're going to be able to take the entire flood flow of the San Joaquin River and just route it into our irrigation systems, put it on land and see it disappear. That's not going to happen. It's more, we're making a marginal impact on the flood risk, which contributes to the overall program of flood control. But if you look at the numbers on what the potential for recharge to our aquifers is, with kind of a really aggressive implementation, it's quite significant. And in Sigma world, we're looking at people pulling out tens of thousands of acres of or more of permanent crops and highly valuable stuff. Yeah. So that's the other big part of that program. Okay, I'll pass off to Mike.
Yeah, I'll just add a couple things. One is in Texas, which is where I lived until about 1 year ago. It was really Hurricane Harvey in 2017, which of course devastated Houston, which brought this topic into some conversation, and we began to hear some discussion of it with some of our elected representatives and some of the decision makers, policy makers in the state. So it's a very important topic. We're just beginning to talk about it. I think if you want to read one case study to think about would be the Yellow River in China, which has become somewhat famous, and the impact that's been made on the flooding events in that river over a period of decades through reforesting and planting some of the hillsides up in the headwaters. So it's absolutely possible to impact and reduce flooding through land manipulations, through soil manipulations. It requires a high, I would just say, from our perspective, in our project, we work with one farm at a time. We appeal strongly to self-interest. These are things you can do on your own place, quite simply. Why not? Give it a try, see how it works. The thought of doing this in a coordinated way involving large numbers of producers in a whole watershed or a whole region is daunting. It's going to be challenging, obviously, in a different kind of way. But and it's probably an indicator of how new some of these things are, that we haven't begun talking about this sooner. You know, it sort of blows my mind, but it's a great topic. I'm just beginning to hear some conversations about it, and I would not discount the possibility that in the not too distant future, we'll see some genuine, you know, projects or pilot projects that attempt to do this.
Right, and I have another question for both of you, and it kind of follows on what you just said, Mike. Like, NRCS has been pushing kind of soil conservation and soil quality for nearly 80 years now, since it was the Soil Erosion Service back in the 30s. How would you, in your conversations with growers, how would you best suggest incentivizing farmers to better manage their soils?
I'll take a crack. I'll just say, well, many of these practices that we preach and that we teach take a while to really kick in, have an effect, and become profitable for the producer. We've done a lot of work on cover crops, as you know, Rex, in South Texas, and what we're finding is that in those initial years, producers may not see much benefit. So I absolutely see a role for the NRCS to incentivize on the front end and to support adoption, to support that, what can be a difficult transition period. And I guess that's where I would put some money. Also would say in our project, we appeal to the, many of these things are profitable, or if you get them working right, they're profitable. And so one of the wonderful things about soil health is it really, you know, may not need to be incentivized that strongly as people begin to see, hey, I can make more money doing this. In a livestock operation, it's greater forage, it's greater numbers of animals on the land. That doesn't mean we shouldn't incentivize it. I think we do need to. A lot of these things are still new, and it's really not fair to ask people to take the risk with incredible public benefits. So we as a public should support people that are trying to do these things. Conservation stewardship program is terrific. Obviously, EQIP is a great program, but that's about all I can really think of. I'll flip it over to you, John, if you had anything.
Yeah, John, you work with San Joaquin growers. That's a kind of they're a tough nut.
Yeah, no kidding. No, I think, Mike, you really hit it on the head. I think a lot of the things you just said would be applicable in the San Joaquin Valley and Sacramento Valley. But I guess the thing I'd say is, despite the fact that I work in a water quality program that requires growers to find practices to protect water quality, and growers are dealing with water scarcity, I think the prime mover, the prime motivator is productivity and profitability. That is so that's where we go for motivation in the water quality program, not to say, hey, you know, if this doesn't happen, then you're going to have problems on the regulatory side, but to say, let's get the nitrogen into your crop so that you can harvest it. And okay, be pretty careful doing that so we don't have a lot of extra nitrogen hanging around that could leach. And you know, what I find is that when you pull 10 or 20% more of your applied nitrogen in your crop, you can have a much bigger crop. Even in these highly productive systems, there is that kind of delta out there for growers to realize. And you kind of heard it in Russ's voice this morning when he was talking about his walnuts. He's after productivity and cost control. So I think those are the biggest motivators, but Sigma really kind of piles on more, because if you can infiltrate water and manage, get good productivity with a little less water, you're not going to have to take as much land out of production. So that's a big motivator kind of on top of the productivity stuff.
Right. Okay. Well, it's now 12:30 and we've reached the end of our time. There's just one or two questions I didn't get to, but we'll respond to those. I think Dr. Dickey and Dr. Morris, thank you very much for your contributions today. They're really good presentations, and thanks for your thoughtful responses to the questions too.
My pleasure.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Rex.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, folks.